Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@usaprepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us. We broadcast 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. through 11 a.m. Central Time. And if you'd like to listen on a telephone listen line, there's one while we are live, and that number is 712-770-9418. 712-770-9418, and that's provided by Global Star. Live when we are live, 9 through 11 a.m. Central Time. If you'd like to call us, we'll pay for the call, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. Jason is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. Thank you, Jason. Dr. Richard Allen Miller is with us. Welcome, Rick.
Well, you clear your eyes. Thank you. The wind-up, the pitch. Oh, it's just outside. Ball four.
Rick, you would be really good at that. You really would. You'd be really good at calling baseball games, And so, third career, fourth career, maybe.
I'm sorry.
That could be a third or fourth career.
Well, I always dreamed someday of opening Saturday Night Live.
What
the hell is that? What is that? What is that thing anyway? What's the deal here? What is that? Yeah, well, that's about right on just about everything anymore. You and I, we've talked a little bit about the coronavirus offline. I am now realizing that everything is a weapon. And everything, including people like me, they're using me to hysteria and cause misdirection. And I'm embarrassed because I'm as duped as everybody else. But the coronavirus, this thing, is it real? And how many people know? How many people have opinion? Well, everybody has an opinion now because the media, from everything from CNN, ABC, Newsweek, whatever, everybody has been doing this. And yet, nobody mentioned the fact that the Hong Kong riots have all stopped, the protesting stopped, that hospitals are not being built, they're detention camps. Now, what do you do in a detention camp? Well, one of the things you do is you isolate ideas and reindoctrinate. And there are technologies today that even I can't even understand in terms of hypnosis, mind control, and other kinds of nefarious leveraging, if you will, to take large groups of population, isolating them from one another, reindoctrinating. And what happened is that some of these weapons are more dangerous than they realize when they go to deploy them. And what happens next is that instead of reindoctrination, you start having a body count, and that isn't what you want to do. You don't want to kill the person. You want to reindoctrinate. And I'm going to suggest that all of this is happening, and that if you have a choice between globalism and nationalism, where do you want to go? You want to have a one-world government? Well, you already have that attempt going on across the board with complicity between different countries. And they have things that they share and things they do not share. And Iran is typical of what just happened in Iran just a few minutes ago. And they're locking down their country. Is it to protect citizens? In the United States right now, the CDC had stopped monitoring everything. Why? Well, the coronavirus is it's a variation of the common cold. Now, how many people, raise their hands, have had the cold this winter? And then to have a government like China use that as a fear tactic to have purpose in isolating one person from another. Now, is it a common cold or is it something else? And the question is, correct answer, like I say to everything, is yes, all of the above. It is a weapon that got out of control and is more dangerous than they realized in terms of reindoctrination. You'll notice that Hong Kong has stopped. Nobody's focused on that right now. And Hong Kong was saying no to China. There is most likely going to be a major revolution. Did you see the tweets I sent you just this morning of people literally running out of the country? Literally, I mean physically running out of the country. The line was thousands of lines of people running to get out of the country. That's at the unchecked border points around Vietnam and so on. I have friends that are old vet friends of mine that live there because they married, local women and, go back and forth for family things and like that. And I can tell you that no matter what is happening, we will really never, ever truly know, and that a pandemic is like a grid down situation. A kid with pimples on his face in Pakistan could probably drop down and say, oh, wait, Santa Barbara did drop down, didn't it? And that was done by a SEAL team, by the way, to show how vulnerable we are just in that arena several years ago. Did anybody get that message? No. I don't have an answer. What I can tell you is, if you're healthy, there's nothing that's going to hurt you, except maybe a bullet, make you unhealthy in a heartbeat. I don't have answers. Vincent?
Okay, so I believe you said if you're healthy, nothing is going to hurt you. Now, there's a lot of ways of thinking about that. For example, you could say, well, your immune system is good and you'll be able to fend off, these maladies. Okay, but here's something that we cannot fend off right now because our government has prevented us from being able to fend it off, and that is the supply chain shortages. And so let me give you an example.
Secondary repercussions, and it wasn't even about the virus.
Mm-hmm. So let me give you an example. They mentioned this on the air before, and I confirmed it today, this morning, just before the broadcast. So here's what I said. Over the weekend, we got a call, and there was a person who needed an auto part on the East Coast. And it was a simple part. I'll even tell you what it is, class. It was a camshaft position sensor. It used to be that, like if you were talking about in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and before that, 80s, the camshaft timing of an internal combustion engine, a four-cycle engine, like the one you have in your car, whether it be a four-cylinder inline, a six-cylinder inline, a V6, or a V8, didn't matter, or a V10 or a V12, originally they had camshafts that were timed with a chain to the revolution of the crankshaft. And it was fixed. It was fixed by the rotation of the crankshaft. Well, to improve fuel economy, engineers decided that they could time the camshaft forward and backward with relationship to the crankshaft just like they could time ignition spark relating to the position of the crankshaft or the piston. And it worked really well. The modern engines now use what's called a camshaft position sensor. And it's this little device. You could think of it as about the size of a Sharpie marker barrel, maybe 2 inches long, with 2 terminals on the end. And it just slides into the engine. It's held in by 1 bolt and an O-ring. Well, no engine will work without that today that I can think of. You know, any common modern engine of probably the last 20 years. Well, they fail. It's like a known thing that if you have one of these engines, you will be replacing the camshaft position sensor. And I've replaced a bunch of them. Well, they're made in China. So we got this call over the weekend. The code said camshaft position sensor was bad, and all this guy had to do was get one. But there weren't any to be had in his city. Nobody had them. Not one auto parts store had them. And I'm not talking about like one AutoZone store or another AutoZone store. I'm talking about all brands. You know, AutoZone, Pep Boys, Advance Auto, all of them. Nobody had a camshaft position sensor. So I thought that this is a common part, and this was for a Chevy, a common Chevy, not an exotic Chevy, a common Chevy. Well, we confirmed this morning that there right now is beginning to be a supply chain shortage for engine and transmission parts. Not engine oil yet. And that probably won't happen because a lot of oil is from the United States and refined in the United States. But engine parts and transmission parts, a lot of them come from China. So that's where we're seeing these shortages developing right now. So what would that be? Engine parts, that would be bearings, that would be valves, that would be spark plugs, spark plug wires, gaskets. Transmission parts would be gaskets, seals, steel plates, transmission conductor plates, filters, those kinds of things. They come from China. So the virus itself, that's part of the problem. But the rest of the problem is the domino effect downstream when Chinese factories have been shut down. And they have been shut down. If you look at every automobile I know of that has a gasoline or diesel engine uses an automotive type battery, lead acid battery. A few years ago, you could get one for, I don't know, maybe less than $50. Now, yesterday, $145 at AutoZone for a common Chevrolet-sized, mid-sized battery, $145. They used to last 3 years. They still do last 3 years. They're warranted for 5 years, some of them, but they don't last 5 years. So if you have a battery, it's going to need a replacement in about 3 years. Now, if we can't get something as simple as an automotive battery, that's a showstopper. You're not going to work. If you live in the suburbs, it's going to be tough to go to work. And in 3 years, nobody's going to work. We'll be right back. The case for you, class, just go to a different search engine like DuckDuckGo or Start Page. So that's what Rich Sheeman had to share with us. Rick, are you concerned about the secondary effects of the supply chain, as I mentioned during the last segment? 40%
of everything in the United States now comes from China, approximately. My pot doesn't. I grow it locally, but, in terms of food, in terms of silverware, cups, glasses, pots and pans, my stove, my, refrigerator, everything has a relationship to China in some way. And food is the least of it. Most cities, including rural communities, I would say the normal population, less than 3% comes from the local production. And really, that should be up to 40%, where you're using your local farms and farmers market and local growers. Safeway, Thriftway, Albertsons, all of those places bring their food in from centralized warehousing that is delivered, again, 40% of the products that go into that thing, including cottage industries, like beaver, horseradish, mustard, whatever, comes from China. And what we need to do is realize that this whole event that has happened is an opportunity to restructure what we do today. And when I say that, I don't mean beginning this weekend. I mean this morning, where now when you go to the store, you will notice that everything is starting to go up in price, everything, except the farmer's market. Now, the farmer's market people will follow the trade in terms of best buy and fair wage markup, because that's what they're trained to do, and they also buy from Safeway and Albertsons. And so they have their expenses going up as well. However, once you start using your own garden or your neighbor's garden, a bunch of costs change immediately. And what I've done is back in 1993, I wrote grants. I never submitted them, but I wrote grants for local communities having a BBS on surplus food each week that didn't sell at the farmer's market, where you had a local stock exchange of surplus tomatoes that could be used for canning or cucumber chips, whatever. I would recommend that everybody listening today plan to go to the farmer's market this weekend and start getting to know the individuals that are trying to grow for local. And while it's a little more expensive, it actually is not and will not and won't be at some point. There's going to be a trade-off on why you buy locally. And once you get that message, it will no longer be about how expensive it is. It'll be about health and the quality of the food you're getting. And who knows what they're going to do next with imports and injection of special surprises. Watch how that one plays next, probably next year, like Wuhan was this year, to change the economy, the dollar, and to cause disruption in terms of your quality of life.
Yeah, I was thinking about some of these Chinese ports. When we come back, I'll tell you about well pumps and what I learned yesterday about well pumps. So think about it, class. Let's say your well pump goes bad. What are you going to do? Uh-huh.
Yeah. All of the Chinese
and so is... yeah, right. And that's one of the things I want to talk about with well pumps. Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us, richardallenmiller.com, Richard, A-L-A-N, Miller.com. Rick, I did a little bit of research over the last few days about submersible well pumps. Now, let's say you have a water well, and you want to buy a pump that will pump the water out of that well, potable water or potable water. Well, an American pump would be about $400 or $500 minimum. And then there's a control box that goes with it, which has a capacitor in it, which may go bad. So the idea is you put the capacitor and the rest of the controls, let's say in the basement or in the building, and then the pump itself goes down the well. The idea is if the capacitor goes bad, it's easy to change it because you don't have to pull the well plumbing out. You don't have to pull 200 or 300 feet of well pipe out with the well pump at the bottom of the well out. So the Chinese make one, and I'm looking at it right now on eBay, and they have a 1 horsepower deep well submersible pump. It's 115 volts, 33 gallons per minute. It's rated at 300 feet. Stainless steel. Looks great. It's only $113 shipped. However, if you read down the rest of the literature, you find out that, it only really goes to 91 feet. It won't work very well with below 91 feet, but they say it's 300 feet. So they lie. These Chinese guys lie with their statistics, and they say it will deliver 30 gallons per minute. Well, it'll deliver 30 gallons per minute if the well is only 6 feet deep. Nobody I know has a well that's 6 feet deep that has a submersible pump. No one. Okay, but if you have a well that's 207 feet, it will deliver 0 gallons per minute. If you have a well that's just a little bit less than that, maybe 206 feet, it might deliver 2 gallons per minute. But this thing is rated at 30 gallons per minute. Or 33 gallons per minute. What I'm trying to say is these guys lie. And their products are junk. And nobody in their right mind would install a 115-foot well pump at 300-foot depth. Nobody would do that because the resistance of the wire would prevent the pump from working in the first place. You need a 240-volt well pump to go that depth.
I did the same thing when I went to Bimart, Walmart, or Harbor Freight, and they have on sale boxes of screws, 6 different varieties in a kit, so that you've got a whole bunch of different screws. And it's really cheap. It's something like $4 for all this hardware. And when I bought it, I started to use it to connect some of my furniture using steel so that it would be up against the wall. It wouldn't lean like a bookshelf. And it turns out that these screws, I can bend them and break them with my wrist. That means when I was screwing it into the wall, the screw bent. Now, I've never had a screw bend in my entire life until now. There used to be, and I've said this before a long time ago, 2 ways things were marketed. There was a Best Buy and cheapest. And cheapest was the way I would go when I was down and out in Beverly Hills. I didn't have any money. I had to get by, and I bought that pump wrong. Now, it turns out you get what you pay for. And cheapest is now the only way anything is sold because everything comes from China, whether you get it from Harbor Freight, Walmart, Bimart, or Fred Meyer. There is no American Best Buy anymore, like Craftsman, and then higher on the food chain, Snap-on. And when you bought wrenches, you wanted your wrench to last forever, like a screwdriver. Well, now you can buy 16 screwdrivers for $6. How long do you think those screwdrivers are going to last? Well,
it's worse. It's worse than that, Rick. I'll tell you why it's worse than that. You mentioned Chinese wrenches, like we're talking about Harbor Freight. I know for a fact, I have some Harbor Freight wrenches, and I consider those the inexpensive wrenches. If I'm stuck on the highway, I bought a set for every vehicle. So we have a set of metric, and we have a set of SAE. For every vehicle, we have a set of screwdrivers. We have electrical tape. We have fuses. We have a whole bunch of spare parts. Serpentine belts, antifreeze, transmission fluid, engine oil, distilled water, every vehicle, okay? And I have to tell you that if you measure with a dial caliper the distance and the opening of a cheap Chinese wrench versus a Craftsman wrench, you'll find out that the cheap Chinese wrenches don't quite fit the nuts and bolt heads.
That's correct. They don't.
Properly.
On purpose, by the way.
And so the tolerances are so bad that if you have a nut or a bolt that is kind of rusted on and it's kind of difficult to get off, and if you use one of those cheap Chi-Com wrenches, it is likely that you are going to round the head off and make it darn near impossible to get it off after you've rounded it off because the wrench is sloppy in terms of fit.
And then you have much more expenses.
Right. Now, I've got one snap-on wrench, and I've had it probably since the late 60s. I have a bunch of Craftsman wrenches from the 1950s that my father bought. And they still work perfectly today. Now, yes, they are, they're tarnished, but they're like 70 years old. And they work perfectly well. And they are more in demand. You would pay more for one of those wrenches on eBay, a Craftsman wrench, a vintage Craftsman wrench that was made properly to the right tolerances than you would for a whole set of wrenches from the Chi-Com factory outlet called Harbor Freight. And that's the truth. And if you look at vintage screwdrivers, they cost more than the current screwdrivers. But the vintage screwdrivers generally were made of chrome vanadium steel, and they had ground tips. They weren't smashed in a hammer kind of a forge where they take a piece of round steel for the shaft and they smash it under pressure and make the tip of the screwdriver. They were ground to precision. That was the American way. That's the quality screwdriver. So
now you move that whole metaphor into food and nutrition and health. And now you're getting a bigger picture of how we are being invaded from all sides.
And let me give you one other example, class. So let's say you go to Sears, if you can still find one. And let's say you decide you want to buy screwdrivers, and you look and you say, wow, $7.99 for a screwdriver? Really? I can get this whole set, Craftsman. They look just the same for, let's say, $20. I can get a set of them for $20. Or I can buy one for $7.99. Here's what I'd like you to consider looking at. Look at the tip of the screwdriver. Now, the handles look similar, but the tips are different. The tips on the ones that are less expensive in the set are stamped. You can see the ridges in them from being stamped. If you look at the more expensive one that's sold singly, you'll see that it's got a ground tip that will fit the screw better. So if you have screwdrivers and you go, I guess there must be something wrong with me because I can't get this screw to tighten or loosen because it keeps slipping off the head of the screw. The screwdriver slips off the head of the screw. What's wrong? Well, it's because it's a cheesy made stamped screwdriver. And it's probably worn. But the ground ones, the chrome vanadium, they'll last a lifetime. That's the difference. So not all tools are the same, even though they look
might even,
the same.
Use that metaphor to avocados or tomatoes that, quote, were ripened on the vine.
Yeah. Ripened on the vine rather than...
It's the same concept slid over into health. And all your pharmaceuticals come from China, including your immunization. Now, where do you think that's going to go?
Ripened on the vine versus ripened on the 18-wheeler or in the 18-wheeler. That's what we're talking about, right? Ripened.
No. Ripened on the vine now. I'm talking about they are using hydroponic systems rather than growing them in fields, so that the tomato is bright red and will hold that bright red. I'm not talking about hitting it with kerosene. Mm-hmm. That's another thing that they did 20 years ago. No. And when you buy cheaper oranges, they will throw at the bottom 2 oranges that are more than 2 weeks old because they start to rot. The others don't, but those do. And what happens next is that those rot, spreads to the ones that won't rot, and now instead of having 20 oranges, you have 14, because 6, not 1 or 2, are gone. And that is an intentional thing that's done in Mexico that now China has used and gone way beyond that. No, detention camps are what are they called? Reorganizing your mind camps. And that's why people are fighting in the streets, because they don't want to go. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not there to deliver the mail with rifles. And I watched some videos of the way they're hitting women. A man hitting a woman, repeatedly hitting this woman, and he had a uniform on. How do you think that would have played in America?
Well,
law enforcement.
It is happening in America, Rick. We've got guys in black uniforms slamming.
It's happening with scrutiny, like in China. Basically, this whole thing started with a protesting in Hong Kong, and they went into the streets and they were protesting. And I remember several people being killed because they threw themselves in front of tanks, and the tanks drove over them.
Yeah.
And now that whole movement, what happened to it?
Yep.
Where
Tiffany,
in detention camps being retrained. And that is exactly what is happening right now with Wuhan. Now, is Wuhan real? My guess is it was a special kind of gas that will indoctrinate or subjugate an individual for reorientation. And I'm guessing it is a mind control type of thing, and it was more toxic than they realized, and it started doing body counts rather than retraining.
Rick, we're going into a break, and Tiffany, I've got you on the air, so please stay with us, and you're up as soon as we come back from these few short commercial announcements. Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us. Tiffany's been on hold for 5 minutes, 33 seconds. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you so much. It's an honor and a pleasure to invite into the class. I just briefly wanted to chime in on the poor quality of the tools. I live in a 125-year-old farmhouse up on the Canadian border, and the closest store where you could even buy a tool is probably 30 minutes away. So relying on tag sales, knocking on, we call it barn knocking, just going and maybe finding a couple who have sold off the herd or
Tiffany, you're fading in and out. Could you just speak closer into your microphone, please, and continue?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And I apologize. The service up here is quite spotty. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Oh, now it's good.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to chime in on the poor quality of the tools and a way to possibly circumvent that. Going to your Chinese factory outlets, the closest one here is probably 30 minutes away anyways. We have a lot of tag sales and swap meets and things like that during the summertime. And if you're a savvy buyer, have a mental list, you can go and actually find tools of high quality that are still under a lifetime warranty. Maybe they might be rust covered.
Okay. Well, I agree with that. We're in such a poor area here in Missouri that people don't have a lot of good things. So we don't have a lot of swap meets that have that. But on the East Coast, there's plenty of that. In the Northeast, there's plenty of that. Ohio area, yes, and Florida. And if the tools are rusty, all you have to do, believe it or not, they had something called navel jelly that would take off the rust. But also, if you just have a grinding wheel, not a grinding wheel, a wire wheel, and if you have one on the end of a drill, you wear eye protection, you can just brush that rust right off. And we've done
100%. 100%. So, not that one man's trash is another man's treasure, but, only a rich man can afford cheap tools. So, I would advise the class to, maybe not drive directly to the store if they need something, and also sharing. We go up a lot.
Okay, I agree with everything you've said. I've got one quick question for you. Why do you listen to USA Prepares? I don't believe you've called in before, have you?
I have not. I listen to you every day, avidly. I listen to it for a lot of different reasons, actually. I love the people who call in, and I glean a lot of information from their experiences. I've learned tools. I'm not great with maintaining my auto, so the information that you pass along, I take notes. I weave them into my dailies. There was a piece that you did about the gasoline and not letting it go down past the quarter tank or half a tank rather. And that's my bad. I'm always there. I'm always coasting on E. And I said, well, I just have to stop doing this. I'm ruining, ruining my car.
You're ruining your fuel pump. Yeah, that's correct.
Exactly.
And I wouldn't let it go below a quarter. That's the number, a quarter.
Yep.
That's the percentage.
I can't thank you enough for your time and dedication, and also that of the other instructors. It really has made a difference in the way that I behave and
Tiffany,
pass on information to friends.
I'd like to share this with Rick on with us today, and I'd like him to hear this. But if you could just see what it's like to have a whole bunch of instructors in one room. What I'm talking about, like our farmhouse in the kitchen, where we're all, having having dinner together. It is a sight to be seen, and you'll see a whole bunch of conversations going on simultaneously, and everybody's involved in all of them. It's incredible to watch this, and I am the most fortunate person on the planet because I have the friends of the instructors and the class at USA Prepares. And what I've found is there are common threads that run through all of us here at USA Prepares, and they're all good, kind, nice, gentle, proactive, sharing common threads. It's wonderful, and all the instructors give up their time to be on the air. Rick, would you say it's really interesting to be at the farmhouse or at the Get Prepared?
I have to hold my breath.
I just can't get over his laugh. It's just so refreshing.
Whatever you think of Rick,
healthy.
Whatever you think of Rick Miller, it's absolutely true.
Yeah, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Rick Miller is a real treat. Tiffany, did you have anything else you wanted to share?
I don't want to take up any more of your time. I just say thank you so much. And, if people are searching around for tools, get out and find your yard sales. Look for the ones that are still have the warranties, because you can scoop that right up.
All right. Thank you so much, Tiffany. It took 68 years for me to become this cynical. And at the top of the hour news, I believe I heard something about a drop in coronaviruses and deaths because they've changed the way they count what a person died from. And I got to tell you, back in I'm sure this is something like this has happened to you too, Rick, when we were being used as tools for the big machines. Back in 1976, I worked for a Fortune 100 company. It was a really big conglomerate. And this company made a lot of really large products. I mean, really large. And they made some small ones, too. And this company hired me to be, my first job in the Fortune 100 company was that of a financial analyst. And so the boss came to me and said, "Hey, Vin, I want you to do some financial analysis. And here's the deal. We make these calculators, desktop calculators. And ours are the best. But we need to have 67% or more of the cost of these calculators from the United States in order to put Made in USA on the calculator and on the box and in our advertising. So now think about this. Rick, you've seen these desktop calculators. There's a plastic case around them. They have a power cord. They have a display, a digital display. They have a keyboard and a printer that would print on a roll of tape. So my job was to figure out how this could be made in the United States of America when the keyboard was made in Japan by a company called Alps, A-L-P-S. The display was made in Japan. The circuitry was made in Japan. And the printer was made in Japan. And what we made was the cover, the plastic covering that concealed all of the mechanism. That was my job to figure that out. I had to go to the staples, the two staples that went into the manual to tell you how to use this calculator, the paper that went into the manual, the ink that went on the paper that went into the manual, the cardboard box that it was sold in, and the tape and everything to put it all together. And I was able to come up with 67% of the cost. However, if you looked at the content, not the cost, if you looked at the content of that calculator, there was no way that you could say that was made in the United States because a small amount of the parts came from the United States. But it costs more to make those few parts, like the cover. And that's how we were able to say made in USA, 67%, or just over 67%. So what I'm talking about is lying with numbers. I'm talking about lying with statistics.
Yeah, so I did the same thing in agriculture. I had a farm in California growing feverfew for migraine headaches. And they had a big field of migraine headache remedy. And they would swath and bale it. They made them into bales, feverfew. Those bales were shipped to China, capsulated and tabulated, and put in the tablets and capsules, and brought back for Costco to sell as Centrum, and one other brand that is so-called American brand. The product was grown in America, but it was cheaper to tabulate, to put it into a tablet and a capsule by shipping it to China and having it packaged there and shipped back and sold as an American product. Now, when I saw that happening, I realized that American agriculture has changed. And that even when we grew the crop, it still had fingers on it from other countries. And that is what was wrong with America. And the convenience of taking feverfew and putting it into a little pill so that you can eat it. And you would have thought that you should be able to do that out of San Francisco. There are tableters and capsulators everywhere. The ones that I used, they would bring in product from India, like psyllium, and sell psyllium to Nature's Way in Provo, Utah, Mormons, and they would tabulate and capsulate it. How come the Mormons weren't doing feverfew? Well, they were, but it wasn't being sold as Centrum, and there's another brand, and I can't think of the name of it now because it's so common. It's a common brand that Costco does, and you think of it as American because it's cheap and inexpensive. It says grown in America, but it isn't. It was touched by China. And the vitamin industry is the tip of the iceberg in what has happened to American agriculture and the U.S. pharmacy of what we call the herbal pharmacy, where alleged use products, that you buy your vitamins and vitamin D and so on. All your rosehip vitamin C comes from Peru. All your da-da-da. I started learning this early on and realized that the export of 10 to 1, in terms of what we would use, like for spices, like cinnamon. If the amount of cinnamon, and you have a choice of where cinnamon comes from, either comes from Indonesia, which is a Kerinci, or it comes from China, which is a Tongheng. Tongheng cinnamon is, in my opinion, has more sugars. It's sweeter. And they're a different genus and species, just like bay leaf. But whatever would be used in cinnamon products, from bakeries doing cinnamon rolls to whatever, cinnamon toast, whatever, was written in stone. Europe will use literally 10 times as much. They don't have as many people, but the reason that's true is because they've been using spices 200 years before America. And people in America do not use spices like they do in Europe and Asia. And that's Mexico. Mexico was using jalapeno because of their water. The jalapeno pepper was different because it burned out and killed certain organisms that allowed you to be able to eat it. That's why they like their hotter diets. That's why Cambodia cooks with different kinds of heavy-duty spices, because it kills the organisms that were found in that country. And I'm trying to re-educate in my writings in agriculture, and today my strong recommendation is if you have a prescription drug that you're dependent on, like a heart medicine, blood thinner, whatever, your smartest move today is to grow it in your own garden, because guess what? I'm going to guess in less than 5 years, you're not going to be able to get it at any price. That's why Canada, right now, you can buy things like for male erection disorder on down to opiates 5 times cheaper in the mail than you can going to your local pharmacist. All of our industries have been contaminated, and this Wuhan virus has brought it to a head in terms of how it's going to affect, not pandemic, that's the slightest of the problems. It's going to cascade in everything because of the way we have been herded into it. I have a picture of cows having a choice, taking the right door or the left door, and both of them lead to the same hole in the wall. You know, you have a choice. Which way do you want to be killed? This way or that way? The whole thing's wrong. And it's metaphysical. It's time people realize that these choices is not really a choice, and that it's time for you to start thinking about re-evaluating how and why you do what you do, because cheapest and best buy no longer exist in the marketplace. It's all about cheapest now, and it all comes from China. And they just put it with different faces on it.
Okay. Well, here's a thought. This dovetails pretty nicely with what you've been saying. I thought years ago that I saw the increasing products coming from China. I thought, wow, they're really taking over. But one thing they probably won't do is take over the production of heavy, large, inexpensive products. Things that would be hard to ship, things that would be heavy to ship, things that could break. They won't be able to do that because they're inexpensive. Not true. And I'm going to give you an example. Chinese drywall. So a lot of our homes are finished on the inside with, sometimes it's called sheetrock, sometimes called drywall. Well, Chinese drywall appeared in the United States between the years of 2001 and 2009. 100,000 homes have Chinese drywall in about 20 states in the United States. And the Chinese drywall is made with toxic chemicals that's sandwiched between 2 layers of paper, the outside layer and the inside layer. But inside is industrial waste, probably fly ash from coal-fired power generation stations. And the Chinese drywall emits sulfurous gases and other volatile chemicals, including carbon disulfide, hydrogen sulfide, carbonyl sulfide. And as the temperature and humidity rises, there are more off-gassing of these chemicals. There's more off-gassing. So it used to be that drywall was made with gypsum, and it was between two thick sheets of paper and kiln-dried. But the Chinese figured out a way of getting rid of their industrial waste and sending it off to the United States. Well, here's what happens. Let me tell you where it is. Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. Let's see, there are other states, New Orleans, but it's in a lot of states, about 20 states. Well, here's what happens. The off-gassing of this drywall will corrode the copper wiring in your house. And if you want to know if you have it, the easy way is to just take off that receptacle cover or that wall switch cover and look and see if the wires are black. Meaning not the insulation, because there's a black wire, a white wire, white insulation, black insulation, and a bare copper wire. If your house is wired with Romex. Look at the bare copper wire. See if it looks like copper. If it looks black, you should be suspicious that maybe you have Chinese drywall in your home. Now, what would it take to get rid of the drywall in your home? Now, I want you to think about that. You have to take everything out of your house. Everything. Then you have, curtains, furniture, rugs, everything. And then you rip the wall. Lowe's agreed to a settlement that may award victims up to $100,000 for damages caused by contaminated drywall purchased at their stores. They said they didn't sell it, but they're willing to pay up to $100,000 for damages to homes contaminated with contaminated drywall purchased at their stores. That's doublespeak. We didn't do it, we didn't sell it, but we'll give you $100,000, up to $100,000 for damages. That's doublespeak. That's what Rick and I have been talking about, for over the last couple of months. That this is the kind of stuff that happens. So, can you trust Lowe's? Obviously not. Obviously. Now, how does that happen? I believe, Rick, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. How does it happen that a store sells a defective product? My take on that is, if you look at the old Sears, Roebuck and Company, I believe they had product testers, product evaluators, laboratories, and they'd say, okay, we need a washing machine that we're going to put the Kenmore brand on, our Sears house brand. And they're made by Whirlpool, they're made by General Electric, made by Frigidaire. Let's test these and let's figure out which is the best value, and let's put, the Kenmore name on whichever one seems to be the most durable, the best price point, all of that. They had people testing products. I think they all got fired. And I don't think we test products anymore. I think that's how we got to this point where products come out of the factories and are sold, and they're lousy. They're defective from the beginning. They're defective in design. They're defective in materials. But I think the factories are saying, no, look, I know, it doesn't work. Yeah, I know it needs those extra screws, bolts, washers, fasteners. I know, but we got to get them out the door, ship them. I think that's what's happening. And I think the engineers who say, yep, no, we need that extra strut. We need that extra kerf. We need that extra gusset. We need that. This material's too thin. It needs to be, 50% thicker, or it's going to fail. No, that's okay. We want to sell a lightweight washing machine. I think that's what's happening. What are your thoughts, Rick?
Absolutely. I mean, why would they want to spend any money when it's easier to sell something and then take it back on an exchange?
I've said for years when I get under a Ford vehicle, I've said, and this doesn't just apply to Ford, if it takes 4 bolts to hold that part together, Ford can do it with 3. If it takes 4, Ford will do it with 3. And that's indicative of where we are today. If you look at a flat screen TV, if you just look at the specifications on the internet, let's say you look at a 50-inch television of maybe 6 years ago, 8 years ago, it might weigh 50 pounds. A new one, a new improved one with more features, weighs 25 pounds. Now, why is that? Well, if you push on the back of the plastic shell of the 50-inch TV, you'll find that it will deflect with your pinky with very light pressure. They have taken out all the material that they can out of the case, almost to the point where you can see through it. That's how much they've taken out. That's how thin this is. That's where we are. And we're not repairing anything. You know, do you buy a television for $300 and then after a couple of years when it quits, bring it to a store and they say, yeah, we can fix that for you. It's going to be $150. Maybe a little bit more, but we don't know. About $150. Would you have your TV repaired that quit after 2 years and spend half the cost to repair it that you spent to buy it? Would you do that? I don't think so. It used to be, believe it or not, there used to be fix-it shops. And you could bring in your toaster, a toaster, and have it repaired, a toaster. When was the last time you thought about repairing a toaster? When was the last time you thought about getting your shoes rehealed or resoled? We just throw them away. Didn't used to be like that. There used to be television repair shops. You know, for $20 you could have your television repaired. Not anymore. Rick, can you share your thoughts on... Dr. Richard Allen Miller is with us, richardallenmiller.com. That's the website if you want to peruse his offering by his books. So in the studio, I have a Technics by Panasonic receiver. It's a model SA-80. It's about 45 years old. I have a pair of Dynaco speakers in the kitchen hooked up to another Panasonic or Technics by Panasonic receiver of the same vintage. All of that equipment, the Dynaco and the Technics by Panasonic, about 50 years old. I would be livid if any of that equipment failed, stopped working. And I've had it for 50 years. Or it's 50 years old. I'd be livid. But today, we don't expect our products to last that long. I use those two receivers every day. I use the speakers every day. And they work flawlessly. Rick, we are now in a disposable society, and that disposable product that we throw away after a couple of years
that
comes
all
from China.
started with, Detroit and Mopar, and that, things were then designed to fail and had an expiration date, and it was the last of the DeLoreans. And the concept of building the best thing that you could with what was available in materials at that moment. And that all changed with Mopar and the idea that you could time your watch on when your battery would wear out. You could take your watch to it. It had a guarantee of 5 years or 3 years or 4 years. And it was like clockwork. It was exactly when it would fail. It was designed that extremely precision. And then it went downhill from there. And that's where I started to realize that my stereo, I have clip-shorn and AR speakers. My ARs are low, they're real high impedance. I mean, you have to have 300 watts just to start to turn them on. And that's where my quality of music came from, like your speakers and your stereo. That's why all of my stuff is still TX. I don't have Sherwood. What I have is clip-shorn and AR speakers, and I have Heathkit. I remember when you made your own thing and you built it yourself, and it never failed. And then there was, and I can't remember, we talked about it last week. I think you gave me the name again of that television where they would take your TV in and redesign it. If they, I can't remember that repair of TV repair. It was a certain kind of a television. No.
Yeah,
you remember that?
And I believe they're done. They had a lifetime.
None of that exists anymore because it used to
warranty.
be best buy per dollar spent what you got for your buck, and or cheapest, and you had a choice.
You know,
now,
Rick, you're talking about stereo. You talked about the Klipschorn.
And this, by the way, this is all what Wuhan virus is about. It has brought that whole concept to the forefront of China now failing in everything. And watch what happens to the world economy as a result.
Okay, so back to that well pump. Now, I mentioned that the United States design has a control box because some of the control parts would fail and you could fix it, above ground. You could fix it in your basement. Just take the cover out, pop out the old capacitor, put in a new capacitor, or replace the entire box. The box would be about $100 if you paid the average price. If you bought this Chi-Com well pump and it's rated for 300 feet, that won't go more than really 100 feet and marginal at best. If you had one of those and they put the control box in the pump at the bottom of the well. And I don't know, class, if you've ever taken a well pump out. It's a multi-person job unless you have the crane on a truck with a boom. Unless you have one of those, it takes several people to take the well pump out. We did one in Virginia ourselves, and it took 4 of us. 4 people to take the well pump pipe out because it was black PVC plastic, and we didn't want to kink it. So we fabricated a winch, a hand crank winch. We fabricated that, and we cranked the pump out. There's a rope on every one of these well pumps that's installed properly, so you can get the well pump out. And we didn't want to kink the well pipe, so there were several people carrying it as I raised it out of the well. And it's a half-a-day job. And then you have to disinfect and shock the well with chlorine because you took the well pipe out, you open up the well, and you don't want bacteria to get in there and kill you. So it's not an easy thing to do. And that was just a 200-foot. Here in Missouri, it's a little deeper than that for us. Well, why would you want to put one of these Chi-Com pumps in if it's going to have to be replaced sooner? And there's another thing I'd suggest to you, that if you happen to decide to replace your well pump and you're going to get a new well pump tank, get a much larger one. Whatever size you think you're going to get a bigger one. And the reason for that is your pump will cycle less often. And if it cycles less often, it will last a lot longer. We have an 86-gallon well pump tank. It's huge. And we have not had a failure in 15 years. And I credit the large well pump tank and the American-made well pump and the American-made well pump control box to the longevity of that well pump. So I suggest that you avoid the Chi-Com well pumps. If you look at Harbor Freight, a lot of their products are substandard, especially the ones that you plug in to electricity. I believe they're substandard. So they're thin. They're for the guy who uses it or the gal who uses it once in a while, not for the professional. Rick, I'm really concerned that we have lost our way with the repairability of items. And when I look at items, I look at, can I fix it? Now, we have a television here, a flat screen television. It's probably 10 years old. And the power supply failed. I'll be darned if I'm going to throw that thing away. I'm not going to do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take it apart, and I'm going to take an ohm meter and a voltmeter, and I'm going to find out which capacitor blew, which capacitor in the power supply blew, and I'm going to try to find them. But guess what? They're all made in China. That's where capacitors come from, substandard capacitors. So when I find it, I'm going to have to get a couple of them, and they're probably going to be like 20 cents a piece. And we're throwing televisions away because a 20-cent part failed. But the guy that would figure out which one of those 20-cent parts failed, you can't find them because they're not around. And if they are around, they want $150 to put in that 20-cent part. Rick, does that sound right to you, or am I?
Well, it's where we've lost our way and where there is no such thing as a gross national product anymore. And now, with what's happened with the Wuhan virus and the reinternment camps that they're using, and by the way, Iran has just started doing the same thing. It is a way to take control of everything away from the citizen. And you'll notice nobody's talking about Hong Kong and the protests that were going on then. It took that out of the media right out of the gate.
I talked to a guy who was driving one of those delivery trucks. I mean, you can call it UPS, you can call it Federal Express, just pick one. Actually, I've talked to both of them. And I said, hey, y'all concerned about the coronavirus? Nah, no. It's just, just wash your hands, everything will be good. I'm stunned that these guys have right behind the seat where the steering wheel is attached, they are driving packages that come from China, and they have no concern about the coronavirus. Now, what I'm saying is they haven't figured out that the coronavirus has shut down the factories that make the parts that are boxed, that are put in the back of their trucks.
Well, that's why those Chinese cargo containers are all sitting in the port, because of that exact problem. That's A, B, and then C. Just follow the money.
We reported well over a week ago that the Chinese have used the term force majeure to stop the delivery of liquefied natural gas. They can't use it. They can't use it anymore because the factories aren't consuming it, so they don't need it, and there's no place to put it. They're not accepting shipments of copper either because they don't need the copper because the factories that use the copper are shut down. So it's still the way it is. And now we have food, refrigerated, frozen food that is sitting in cargo containers because the Chinese can't unload it because the docks are closed. Unbelievable. They are headed for total destruction as far as I can tell. I may be wrong, but it seems to me that if they can't accept shipments of food, they're not accepting copper, they're not accepting natural gas, liquefied natural gas, because the factories are closed, and they've just set up 40 new mobile incinerators. Now, why would they have 40 new mobile incinerators? Obviously, the number of incinerators that they had was not enough. So they have 40 more. And these are high-tech incinerators. Why would they need those if this weren't real? Obviously, this is real. And whether we say that
trying to get out of China right now, it isn't about the spread of the disease. Something else is going on. And I can't believe the pictures I'm seeing. Just someone taking a picture from his phone showed thousands in a big long line running across the border. There's another one that shows all the trucks that are jammed and stopped at the border. Miles of trucks.
Well, Rick, would you want to get on an airplane today?
Unfortunately, no, I wouldn't. No, I would rather drive. But okay. I've got friends and relatives and close friends that are flying in and out of L.A. and San Francisco, and it's. I don't think that the virus is the problem.
The pneumonia is the problem.
I'm not concerned with that part of it. I'm concerned with what's happening as a result of the virus, and that whether the virus was real or it's just common cold, and the CDC has stopped classifying it because it's a cold, it's not this, it's that, and one's this way and one's that way, and one was weaponized. Why would they even weaponize anything like this in the first place? That's a
That's
good
where
place
that's
to
where
start.
Lucille comes in. That's where Lucille comes in. When we find out who has weaponized these things, we need to talk with Lucille and those people. That's what we need to do. Draw and quarter, that's another way. Keel haul, that's another way. Hang in the public square, that's another way. Locks and stocks in the public square, that's another way.
Getting
Stoning,
pardoned.
that's another way.
That's another way. Getting pardoned.
Yeah, what's up with that? So we all know that Tesla makes electric cars, and we all know that the lithium-ion battery bank is what powers the Tesla cars once that battery bank has been charged. Well, Porsche doesn't want to be left out, and they came out with a car called the Taycan, Taycan. There are 130 of them in the United States. Actually, it's 129, because one of them blew up in a guy's garage. He had one, and boom, battery blew up. Now, why would anybody in his or her right mind buy an electric car that will overtax the electric grid in the United States and be powered by charging a battery that comes from China? Why would anybody do that? Especially when you know that, about 7 years from now, you're going to have to either dump the car or get a new, I don't know, $7,000, $10,000, $12,000 battery bank. Why would anybody do that? It's like saying, you know what? I love this car. It is really cool, and I know that I'm only going to have to replace the engine in 7 years. Not tune it, replace it. Rick, any comments?
Well, I'd like to end my part of this by also mentioning the debate last night where 6 Democratic presidential candidates sparred and in Las Vegas. And for the first time, Mike Bloomberg trying to buy his way into presidency. And it's interesting to see who fibbed, who lied, and who exaggerated. That's very enlightening. And that's the way I wanted to end today. I want you to understand we're at war, and there's more going on around us that we miss because of, children, look over here. ISIS is beheading a bunch of people. Children, look over there. And the media just held an election for Democrats with Bernie Sanders and the rest of them. And guess who lied? Guess who didn't lie? Guess who exaggerated? That's an interesting poll.
Well, would you say that all of them lied? All of them exaggerated?
No, most all of them didn't. Only a couple lied, was false, and or misleading. And isn't that interesting? The ones that did. I found that interesting, and I'm not going to even tell you. I just go do your own research and find out who's who.
Would you term the 2020 election trading billionaires? Is that what we would call that?
It's all about money, and I've had enough, and I'm going to run my own ship like captain and commander. And maritime law rules. And when you get my age and you worry about things like Social Security and you watch what they're doing with Social Security, Pelosi and some of the others, it's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Rick, have you ever gotten votes for president or votes for senator or votes for congressman or votes for mayor? Have you ever gotten any of those?
I get them all the time, and phone calls, unsolicited. The thing is, I no longer vote for someone. I'm usually, unfortunately, voting against someone else. None of them are qualified.
Yeah, I haven't voted. I haven't voted in the last election. I don't plan on voting
in
this
one.
Well, you
have to do. I mean, if you don't, they'll gerrymander. They'll do things. The problem is, it's not even about that anymore. It's about what they're offering for candidates. It's an embarrassment. Trump
for someone,
they're all bad.
For someone to generate the kind of wealth that we're talking about it requires taking a little bit of money from a lot of people, or taking a lot of money from a few people, or both. That's what it takes. And why is it that someone feels comfortable generating so much wealth that they couldn't say grace over it, nor have enough time in their life to spend it? And yet they won't give it to the people who need it more.
Like Bloomberg. It's about power like the guy that invented Microsoft, Bill Gates. It's about power. And power, ultimate, power corrupts ultimately. And that's that's a second enemy of man. The first one is fear, because you don't know.
When I look at Bill Gates,
Castaneda, and I'm here to tell you that there's four enemies. The third one, by the way, is after you have power, personal power, and you start to see things more clearly. That becomes an enemy. And of course, the fourth enemy is what I'm currently enjoying, old age.
When I think about Bill Gates, I think about a guy who sold defective product after defective product after defective product and charged the customers for each one.
Skype was working fine for me until Microsoft took it over, and now every time I use Skype, before I can use it, there's an update.
I don't even use it.
Just like WordPress in my website. How's that?
Hey, we're out of time. Rick, thank you so much for being with us. RichardAllenMiller.com. RichardAlanMiller.com. That's where you go and find his books and purchase his books. Rick, thanks so much. See you next week.